Get started here. Share the screen with this for a moment before we really get started. As I said, in the email, we're going to start with a little memorial to William Quan Judge. Talk a little bit more about it. I think everybody is kind of in agreement that it's important to establish just how important William Q. Judge was, not just for the ULT, but for Theosophy in general. He was given a very, very big mission, and it had a lot of responsibility. And from everything I've ever heard of him, he handled it with a lot of grace. So I'll read a little bit about William Judge, and then call on some of our friends here to read some sections. There's a wonderful picture I found of him riding a donkey, so I thought that was nice and appropriate for going away. So from William Quan Judge, His Life and Work by Sven Eek and Boris D. Zerkoff. This was really excellent, but I haven't ever found this thorough biographical info with him before. And it goes, the son of Frederick H. Judge and Mary Quan William Judge was born in Dublin, Ireland, April 13th, 1851, and spent his early childhood in a country where material adversity often found compensation in its natives' awareness of the silent forces of nature. At the age of 7, a serious illness struck the lad, and the doctor informed the family gathered at his bedside that William was dead. But before grief could overwhelm the would-be mourners, to everyone's amazement, the boy revived. His recovery was slow, however, but during these years of his convalescence, he began to show an interest in mystical subjects. Unaware of his ability to read, the family found him engrossed in books dealing with mesmerism, phrenology, magic, religion, and similar subjects. Later in life, this incident becomes much more investigated, much more talked about. It becomes very significant, not just the age of 7, but what the experience did to Judge, and if it had any lasting effects, which many believe that it did, and many know a lot more about it than I do, and something called Judge's Occult novel that might have talked about that. But some other colleagues of his, Crosby and even Blavatsky, said some things hinting at much more than what we go over about Judge. In 1864, the great mysterious forces of destiny, or rather karma, resulted in the Judge family emigrating to the USA and settling in New York. 9 years later, in July 1873, the Master Morga, instructed H.P. Blavatsky that it was now time for her to immigrate to the USA in order to begin the preparations for the proper beginning of her great mission. She was directed to take up residence in New York, and it was there that these two were united, or rather reunited, in their spiritual work and mission. So we've also already kind of read how that it must be always known that HPB did not start this new Theosophical movement, that Judge didn't, that Olcott didn't, that she was directed so by her authority in her spiritual authorities, which were the masters, specifically Master M at this point. Master M, by the way, also became William Judge's kind of guru as well. Ooh, who did I give this one to? Starts if William Q. Judge. Blavatsky said of Judge pretty early on, after the society was established.
Quote, is William Q. Judge, the man who has done the most for Theosophy in America, who has worked most unselfishly in your country, and has ever done the bidding of the masters. The best he knew how is left alone. Then I say, let him go. There are no Theosophists, and if such a thing should happen, as Judge be left to fight his battles alone, then I shall bid all of them an eternal goodbye. I swear on Master's holy name to shake off the dust off my feet from every one of them. I am unable to realize, at the hour of trouble and supreme fight, any true Theosophist should hesitate for one moment to back William Q. Judge publicly and the lodge in his or her protest, I will let them read the master's letter in the preliminary. All that I have said about William Q. Judge was from his words and his letter to me. Do with this letter what you like. Show it to anyone you please as my firm determination.
I love that. It seems like she's pretty frustrated with someone or some questions or something, and she's just laying that all out. This is the guy. If I wasn't the one that decided, my master decided, and they're in communication. And in the same letter, I believe the same letter, from Master M that gave her the instruction. He said of William Quan Judge, of all chelas, suffers most and demands, or even expects the least. Suffers most and demands, or even expects the least. It's great that it's so concise coming from the master there, because this is along the lines, as you'll see, that everything we read about Judge and the people that knew him say in one way or another. Usually it takes them a few paragraphs to say that exact same thing. So it's wonderful times. Next, as we know, as we've kind of touched on before, we haven't necessarily got to in the history, but before her death, Blavatsky could kind of see some seeds of discontent and maybe seeds of ambition, some other things growing in the society at large. And one of the later things, one of the last letters she ever sent to Judge personally said this: "What can I say? I raised Frankenstein, and he seeks to destroy me. Only you can save the devil and make him man. Breathe in him the soul, if not the spirit. Be his savior in the USA. May the blessings of my seniors be with you, and your blessings will come upon you. Yours is old, but the only one that is ready to sacrifice its spiritual world. Spiritual world, if only to start and continue to work. But while the line around us is becoming less and less, our best intellectual forces are leaving us, one after another, turning into the most cruel enemies. I say, bless the pure in heart, and have only intuition, because intuition is better than intellect. Always yours, HPB." What do you? Oh, there we go. Anders. Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's appropriate to say that I was going with Ava was doing a lecture, one Saturday lecture on secret doctrine, and the Sunday on the voice of the silence for the ADR group in Stockholm. And we have some people in Oslo that started a ULT group up there. And some of the used to be one or two from the Oslo group, maybe three sometimes, at Wednesday meetings, and about the same amount of people, maybe 3 or 4 sometimes, from the Stockholm group on Zoom. So, and we have quite a lot of we've been doing the voice, and we have some questions on the voice starting out of Wednesday. So Judge's work is spread over all of Scandinavia here.
Mm-hmm.
By the hard work of Eva, and we assist her as much as we can.
Yeah, that's amazing. We appreciate it. I mean, hopefully humanity appreciates it, and hopefully we can help that with that too.
Yes, and what you do is I appreciate very much too.
Oh, no problem. No problem. Yeah, I was gonna ask as well, what do you guys kind of in this letter, does anybody kind of have any thoughts as to, what she's kind of saying to to judge? What does she mean by Frankenstein? What do you think she saw coming that not necessarily we see in retrospect?
Well, I think what she saw was there's a development to split in personalities, and also people seeing that HPV was, she had been sick many times and was getting old, and they kind of saw that when she's gone, who's going to be the boss? Who's going to take the figurehead position of HPV? And I think that's the beginning of the split that she saw.
Yeah. And it's
Annie Besant was in Europe, and Judge was in America. Specifically, she was in England. And so there had been kind of a rift developing between them because she was trying to take control of this Theosophical Society.
Sure.
And I'm sure the masters saw it and HPV saw it, so she was putting out, reaffirming Judge personally, but also to let him know, that I guess that you could say as a warning that she saw it was coming and to be prepared.
Oh yeah, wow, and it sure comes, huh?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think exactly like Carl said. It's really well known that HPB in her life and the Secret Doctrine says a lot about the importance of the Americas, and to give Judge so much responsibility and such a huge mission to be the man in America and to be this like bridge is incredible. I mean, not only is this supposed to be, esoterically, this is going to be not necessarily North America, but the Americas are where the sixth root race is going to appear. And I mean, the preparation that must have, that not even during his lifetime, not during our lifetimes, but the things that he was preparing during his short lifetime, very short, is just amazing. The crops that he was sowing, I guess. Yeah.
Also, I think, people have to keep in mind, especially Americans, that at this time, America was like a second world country.
Yeah.
And all of the intellectual, scientific stuff, it was all done in English and French. And so America was not really a threat to them at that point. They were just like if that, a young teenager. And it had, when we see like how different life was for America in, say, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and out the other states, it was a huge difference. And especially now when we, politically where America is and where scientifically where America is, a really big difference.
Wild. The change and the advancement, wild. And the accelerated timeline that in other countries, other empires has been hundreds of years. That just bam.
Also, when you mentioned the responsibility he took, it's because the first part that you read, he's already called a chela. So for them, to know that he's already capable of handling that kind of work, then they knew that he would be the one, because he was always being loyal to the movement. I guess there were more, but he probably was the most loyal and followed the footsteps of Blavatsky, we can say. And therefore, he was that link, for the American continent from the Indian.
Absolutely.
He also traveled to London.
Yes.
He was in Venezuela when he got sick. I mean, it wasn't just North America, it was the Americas. Yeah. Go ahead, Honor.
I mean, what we see from our view is that there was almost 1 million of people that came from Sweden to America. A lot of, I think it was more than a third of the population.
Right.
And many people who came from Europe came because of the spiritual that they wanted practice their type of spirituality.
Yeah.
And according to the ideas on Judge, I find that H.P. Blavatsky was quite aware of the qualities of Olcott and the qualities of Besant. They were good leaders and did some very serious work and were very devoted to what they did. But the one who stood out in having the whole perspective of spirituality, that was Judge, and she mentioned that more than once.
Definitely. Thank you. Yeah, I think he just said it perfectly. It's given, I mean, he was spoken of, he wasn't spoken of in this, is this fear of ambition, or he was going to grab power. You can find, and in my studies and stuff, you can find a lot of, as I've said before, you can find some letters where they're fighting, but they always make up. And I mean, and you can truly, even in their fights, you can see the love there. It's not a fights over necessarily distrust. It's two people that really believe in each other. But who did? Go ahead.
I have been thinking why the masters choose those people, HPV and William Josh, instead of choosing people from India or from Tibet or from China or anything, you know. But knowing people from India, they are very, very, very dogmatic people, you know, and but they have to choose those two people from Eastern, from West, that know the philosophy of the East, and bringing these ideas to the West. You know, otherwise they couldn't do it.
Yeah, I think that's you hit it right there on the head. That's important to, I mean, say what you will, there's a lot of, I'm sure about this, but a big reason why I think people like Judge were chosen, because people are going to listen to this good Irish guy with this great background, you know, was pretty solid Irish background. I mean, at this point, there's more Irish people in America than there is of Irish descent. And I mean, I think the family and stuff had a lot to do with that. But again, they're a very fundamental part of the working class, and the gears that turn in America are those, not just Irish, but that type of European immigrant that came over. In those days, I mean, can you imagine the late 1800s if they chose, the problem with choosing a man of Indian descent or something like that, you might have the problem of that Blavatsky had to deal with, but even on a bigger level of phenomenon of seeing this man as exotic, as we sometimes do, where we give like almost false holiness or false kind of, you know, respect, or just because someone is just exotic, and we don't necessarily hold them to the same regards as we would in, you know, other rational thinking. And I think back then most Americans had never seen an Indian. And so a lot of that the novelty would take a while to get over to the actual meat of the teachings, I think.
So they didn't respect him. That was the problem with Sinet.
Yeah.
You know, was that, you know, when the masters had sent chelas to help Sinet in London, he treated them like servants.
Mm-hmm.
There was that whole arrogance and that happened with Sinet and a lot of the Europeans.
Mm-hmm.
And so they saw that it has to be, plus it's always said it has to be someone from the culture that they have to work with.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean they weren't at the same time, as far as it's always possible that whoever the masters worked with, their brotherhood, they could have been working with people in China and other places.
Sure.
It's just we don't know about it because they had their own line of work going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're about to get to a lot of the Indian stuff, and there's a lot of rationale, a lot of the way that she approached India, and I'm sure the masters instructed her to where to go in Bombay and how to do things seemed extremely well planned and a delicate operation. I'm sure she was instructed on how to do that, on to who to talk to, who needed to hear this, the downtrodden of the caste system, or the younger generations that didn't have too much of a connection to the Vedas and things anymore because of hundreds, if not thousands of years of occupation by the Mughal and then the British. So it was, she says, it was this mightiest of cultures on earth was just beaten down at the time. It was just even in there. Okay, moving on.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
one thing,
Tanya, go
what
ahead.
they say about the Frankenstein,
Mhm.
I think so is because, could be, okay? Because Blavatsky, no, is a one soul and two body. Mr. George,
Mhm.
okay? They have it here in George and also one India.
Mhm.
So they have it like a one soul and two body. And that's why they say, is this India also? So is another thing is I read and also I listened. They knew in another lifetime. They knew each other. So when they see here in this planet, they say, oh, they recognize each other.
Mhm.
So that is another thing because they have a karma.
Yeah.
Karmatic
Relation,
yes,
yeah.
karmatic relation. And also the master, they say they wait for not a perfect body, not a perfect vehicle for Madame Blavatsky, but the best of the best one. So
You're exactly right.
it's another thing.
Yeah.
And the one of the letters say, like I say last week, they say it's the only friend. Blavatsky say to Mr. George, the only one friend.
She doesn't call her people dear friend. Yeah, she's very, very casual and familiar with Judge. Yeah. Thank you, Tim. Kelly, do you have the Crosby quote?
George William.
Oh no, yeah, let's go with that one. That one's great. Yeah, let's do that.
So why you have that paper? I don't have it.
Because you got here later, I would give up on that.
So we're gonna.
These are all mixed up here. Yeah,
Yeah, it's just different.
They're both, so he doesn't have to talk all day.
you can read, you got the George.
Because I couldn't read all.
I'll put this one up so you can see it with
Okay,
us.
no, okay. Keep
Okay.
keep them.
Okay, George William Russell was a famous and much loved Irish poet, mystic, and essayist. He explained that long before I met him, before even written words of his had been read, his name, like an incantation, stirred and summoned forth some secret spiritual impulse in my heart. It was no surface tie which bound us to him. No one ever tried less than he to gain from men that adherence which comes from impressive manner. I hardly thought what he was while he spoke, but on departing, I found my heart, wiser than my brain, had given itself away to him. An inner exaltation lasting for months witnessed his power. It was in that memorable convention in London 2 years ago that I first glimpsed his real greatness. As he sat there quietly, one among many, not speaking a word, I was overcome by a sense of spiritual dilation, of unconquerable will about him, and that one figure with the gray head became all the room to me. Shall I not say the truth, I think? Here was a hero out of the remote antique giant ages come among us, wearing but on the surface the vesture of our little day. We too came out of the past, but in forgetfulness. He with memory and power soon regained. To him and to one other, referring to HPB, we owe an unspeakable gratitude for faith and hope and knowledge born again.
I actually get chills with that one because it's like, you see how he's a poet at certain parts there. My goodness.
But even without him speaking, he says, even with him being quiet, he had the sense of his.
Gave him my heart without knowing. It's just, I don't know, I hope, I've definitely had experiences with like teachers or just fellow students like that, where you're just like, whoa, you know, like that exact kind of feeling when you're connecting on a different level, maybe a karmic level, like Thomas said.
Well, I think like you also said, you know, sometimes we get mesmerized by someone that looks exotic, and it's kind of like we put this false teacher.
Mhm.
But I find that people that are just more subtle and sort of reserved or quiet like this, and well, not necessarily always those characteristics, but you find people that maybe have the spiritual nature, and it's very subtle. It's not like what you would think.
Mhm.
So
Totally.
you know, you have to, you can't judge a book by its cover.
Yeah, he's not wearing bright colors. He's not, you know, selling snake oil or anything like that. He's just a reserved man that you need to talk to, or at least speak.
Yeah.
Roberto, give you the next quote.
Let me say something.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
For me, HPV is direct teaching. But really important for me, especially when I came for the first time here, for me it was more easy.
Or easy, yeah.
Easy to
Yeah.
understand.
Sure.
You know, especially for people who doesn't know much about theosophy.
Yeah.
It facilitates the teaching of theosophy. For me, I don't know.
Hold on.
It's not my own perception. Huh?
I think that's a lot of people. That's how a lot of people come to this teaching. Yeah, it's a lot of times I turn to judge right after I've read a certain thing or something that I hadn't heard from Blavatsky before, because, you know, she'll get the fire going in me, but sometimes I'm so entranced by the way she writes, I think I understand something just because the way she writes. I really, to truly understand something, I think Judge really helps, because it comes at me on a more, you know, basic level than me, we still need to read with that intuition and be reminded of that, because a lot of people, even his like old mystical nature was intuitive. And, but yeah, I think a lot of people approach him like you.
When you read the Ocean of Theosophy, and then you answer the questions,
Mhm.
you can see easily, very fast to tap the ideas.
Yeah.
That's why it's so valuable to have those answers books, because we get a piece of their personality. You get to almost have an idea of how they might answer new questions. Yeah.
Yeah, also, what happens is that if for the first time, at least in my case, you have Blavatsky and you have Josh, you kind of understand Josh better. Not that you get the profound meaning of what he's saying, but this is what happens. Josh seems easier than Blavatsky the first time. But once you begin to study Blavatsky and, you know, everything else, you know, from Theosophy, then you go back to Josh, then you see there's a lot more, you know, inner teachings in his writings that you didn't think or you didn't get the first time you read it. So he's very profound, although he's a little more simpler to write, but his writings are really profound. Now that, you know, like you said, you can go to Answers of the Ocean or the ocean itself, and then you see that it's just as profound as HPV with a different kind of terminology. Because, I mean, you read the Secret Doctrine, and sometimes it's like, the first time you might get a headache, you know, you don't know any of this terminology, especially if English is not your first language, you know. Yeah. So, but with time, you kind of get the idea and get used to, and therefore going back and forth to even Crosby, you know, same thing happened to me about Crosby. You know, it's easier to read, but then when you come back, you say, "Oh, this is what he means by this." Then you can read between lines, you know.
Really got something.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Right.
That's why it's important, I think, for us to meet up too and have these kind of meetings. All the ways the auspices get together especially with people who've been studying a long time and people who've been studying a new times, because a lot of the times I don't see some of that intuition, and someone that's been around longer with studied something a lot more can explain these things to me that I've read 4 times, 3 different ways, but to have someone, you know, around that's a colleague that can kind of take it from a level of where I'm at today and what's going on. At the same time, we also have the advantage of like newer people that get to come up with fresh questions and keep people on their toes, and like we need to remember some, the fundamentals, you know, because we thought we had moved on.
And that's the beauty of the style of ULT. Like everybody gets mixed up. Other students, your students, you know, there are ranks. You know, you're not 33rd grade, no levels, or, you know, anyway. So I think that kind of helps all of us to be, you know, at least the personality not to feel more important than others.
Sure.
And you don't have ranks. But also, like you said, when you're new, you kind of don't understand everything that the other students are saying. But little by little, because you're mixing up with them, you know, you start, you know, getting their ideas and their meaning, and that's a lot of help when you mix everybody with different ideas.
Yeah.
I think that's the beauty of the study. That's why we don't see a lot of people, because sometimes they want to see a guy, they want to see the main guy. I want to see him. He knows it all, you know. So it's hard to.
Well, like totally piggybacking, and perfect timing, piggybacking off what you said was just who had the Crosby vote?
Is this Crosby? Maybe I do.
It starts with
His good friend, JD.
no, that's later. This one, the Crosby, I'm
You have
sorry.
one?
This
The
one,
work we have to do.
You have
I
that?
have it in the words of Thomas Green.
Oh, let me read this. I'll read the Crosby. So just like what Roberto just said, leading into this perfectly, is sometimes what Crosby tells us here, we've read, but the way he kind of puts it to bed. He just reassures us with as someone that is studying, someone that can cite this stuff and has wrote it, and we feel has a very good like pulse on the spirit of HPV and Judge. I mean, that's why we kind of hold him up as such a great teacher. The work we have to do, the knowledge we have to give out, depends on no other names than those of the true teachers, HPB and William Quan Judge. Associates must learn to look to them, to point to them, and to the masters whom they serve. Nothing else will restore the movement. So far as the world and all Theosophists are concerned, Theosophy comes from, sorry, I lost the quote, sorry guys.
There you go.
Theosophy comes from HPB and William Quan Judge, or rather through them. William Quan Judge was not the successor of Madame Blavatsky. He was her colleague and co-worker, who retained his body a few years longer than she remained in hers. He was the stone that was rejected by the builders, who desired to pose as successors to HPB. Oh my gosh, that's so good. He was the stone that was rejected by the builders, who desired to pose as successors to Madame Blavatsky, to the confusion of all who depended on it. The real foundation of the successor craze is the itch for more instructions. This begets the hunt after anyone who will promise fresh revelations. What was given out by HPB and applied by William Quan Judge was not and is not studied by Theosophists at large, or it would have awakened a fuller thought and realization by the students. All the theosophical follies are the result of ignorance, superstition, and selfishness, which knowledge alone can overcome. So I think that's a really good example of the different writing styles of the three as well. Crosby is very, very clear to the point, and not as not as delicate as Judge, and not as grandiose as Blavatsky can be. Go ahead.
How can you study mystic or the profound philosophy, put it ahead, and really just was master at this. Put it ahead, superstitions, dogma, and so on, and leave it the clear part of the philosophy. He was master at this kind of work.
Yeah. I mean, that's why we have so many articles that, like, I mean, can you imagine, I mean, the exposure, the great exposure to early on in Theosophy, if you're coming and you're searching and you come to this building or another place, you have all these articles already separated as like really important things put forth by this guy that is this will educate you. You can read some of his treatises on the karma and some of the stuff that isn't so cut and dry as some of the like Western treatises on Christianity and mysticism, but like, you read them a few times and you'll get it. You definitely get it. And they has some of the intuitive little clues in there that there was even that about his own nature, as you guys can refer on your own if you like. It's really fascinating and amazing and interesting. I'm not as educated as some other people, so I don't want to say much on it. But William Judge, he passed on March 21st, 1896, from a fever, a really strange fever I was not familiar with. He caught it in Venezuela, and just difficulties he'd been dealing with, difficulties that they never really recovered from it, I guess. So yeah, he died very young, 45. Yeah, I'm almost. I would be a very, very humble, low down student still of Judges and comparative, like spirituality and things like that. I feel like that he's almost this Alexander the Great of spirituality, the things he attained at such a young age and the things that he was able to convey and the perspective he had. We'll close with a couple more quotes. Did you want to?
Yeah, I think he was 20 when he got that illness.
Yeah.
So he lasted for 25 years.
Oh, really?
And he would be under the doctor every day taking medications. And so
So most of his life he was dealing with pretty severe, like,
yes, yeah, and yet he was able to do the work.
and travel.
So that's the idea of someone that really is determined, to use, let's say, his vehicle to do some work, regardless of the condition. And he said, I mean, you need to go to the doctor, go to the doctor. He uses common sense everywhere about speaking of illnesses and cures and everything, because some people think that the body needs to be perfect to do work and to be an enlightened being, and it's not necessarily true. I mean, your body doesn't have to be perfect. Your body can be a perfect or imperfect. What it matters is what kind of work you do through it. So he was really determined to that. And these two phrases that you read, the idea when you read about the successor Christ, that people always that look for more instructions or new revelations.
Yeah.
They knew humanity's state of consciousness, and they knew how much we could handle, and how much they couldn't handle because of the condition that we have. Because it's always, we normally, the way we are educated, it's always for gain, to be better than you, than anybody, to be on top of everybody.
It's similar to that lust for phenomena. It's similar. It's very similar.
Yeah.
I mean, how many religions have gotten, conversions saying that, like, hey, we've got some new stuff. Revelation's coming up. The one I come from, Mormonism, when I was on my mission, that's one of the big selling points is, like, you tell people, like, hey, in our church, the Bible's not the end. There's this guy. He's still getting new stuff, and that gets, because people are like, yeah, why wouldn't God still talk to us, And so, yeah.
And a lot of that turned into channeling. A lot of people were looking for more revelations, for more things. But they didn't know that they were just only getting into these dangerous psychic.
Well, the thing is, there's a difference between channeling and spiritualism and being able to go into your own state of meditation where you're on that plane. That was the whole thing she was trying to teach. It's not getting more information. It's learning how to develop your own nature and purify your own nature so that that will unfold naturally.
Yeah,
And that's what she was, and Judge was trying to
yeah.
get people to understand. But it's also part of the cycle. If you think that what this time in the cycle and the race, not just our era, but the whole era is with developing lower mind. But the way lower mind works is it accumulates. And a perfect example of it is how they're developing AI. AI is getting a machine
Yeah.
to be able to read or store all the information that we have so far, and then it'll be able to answer anything. But that takes out what your quote said at the beginning about the importance of intuition.
Yeah.
And people think intuition is the same as a hunch. Intuition, metaphysically and theosophically, is not a hunch. It's guidance from your inner nature. But to get that guidance, your mind has to be receptive to see it in the first place, and then also to recognize it. We might think we're getting an intuitive prompt to go buy a Ferrari. Is that intuition, or is that a desire that you're really like, yeah, if I win the lottery, I'm going to buy a Ferrari?
Yeah.
That's what she's trying to develop, is to be able to distinguish between what part of your nature is spurring your mind into activity.
Right.
Is it your desire nature? Is it your higher mind trying to give you ethics so that to take the right path in your current lower mind state? And that's really what they were trying to develop.
Sure.
I mean, look at from the 70s, all the different kinds of books that came out on New Age. This is the New Age. This is the New Age. You know, the book, The Secret, this is the new thing. The Secret was no different than The Power of Mind to Think and Grow Rich that was done in the 20s. It's all like a rehash of a very particular way of looking at some metaphysical laws and adapting them to your own selfish nature to get what you want. And that's kind of what they were trying to put the brakes on, because they saw it and they were trying to say, look, the problem, like he brought up, well, why not India? The problem with India was they had made out of spiritual ideas that had been handed down, they made it into a caste system and a very restricted amount of people who could learn it. And then they came along to try and make it available for everybody, because they knew there's going to be a point where humanity is going to develop where not just a certain amount of people have an education where they can read, because that's how it was in Europe and America. You know, you might have been able to read, but probably not. You went to work, you worked on the farm, work, whatever. Very few people could read. They saw that humanity was developing at a rate where people would be able to read. And it doesn't matter what your income class is. If you want to know, and you can go to a library or you can get a book, then you can start developing this nature.
Yeah, the access to information we have now is unreal. And it is strange to have a lust for some information that doesn't already exist, because I mean, the internet, and then from these teachings in Blavatsky and Buddhism, which she constantly refers to, is that it's already there. All these teachings, all these revelations, all these transmissions, it's more an act of like accessing, more an act of unlocking it and reaching out without grasping.
But also, all that information is coded.
Right.
There's some of it was put out and it was a good interpretation, and some of it was put out and it was a misinterpretation. And so when you spend a couple years studying a particular philosophy that's based on misinterpretation, that's a big chunk of time wasted. But it's not only time wasted, it's your mind is now cluttered with particular ideas that you think are real. And now you have to unclutter that mind to try and sort out another philosophy and find what's real in it. And that's why, that's why some people leave their religious teaching, because they have some experiences and they go through whatever they're brought up in religion, and then they realize that whatever these teachings are, they're not working in my life.
Yeah.
And what I thought was reality has really turned into a kind of a negative situation. And so that's what they were trying to, they were just presenting the ideas and saying, these are the possibilities of human nature. You have to develop them on your own to a certain level, and then inner inspiration or inner guidance will start to happen. But it's not a you read 6 books and now you're there, because you can't read a book about swimming. You have to swim.
Sure.
And they were kind of showing that at the same time as trying to strip away some of what was the misinformation of their era.
Yeah, well, I mean, as we can see really quick from Isis Unveiled, where kind of things switch up for her pretty soon, is her sort of contention with Christianity is that, you know, what, 1500 years ago, there was a diversion to this, you know, a total different kind of Christianity that wasn't just based on the teachings of Christ and some of the other, you know, parallels and symbolism that he'd have in other faiths and things like that, but it became a tool of the state or the state itself. And, you know, and that's why she rails, her railing against Christianity is kind of because of her love for the teachings of this guy who was called, you know, Christ. Like, that's part of why it is. She really, I think she really, like a lot of people, if you read what Jesus has to say, you got a lot of hope. If you knew nothing of Christianity and you just read what Jesus taught, you might just be like, wow, I've got a pretty good outlook on what's going to be built from what this guy said. You have no idea that it turned out. Right. Hard time predicting.
Or if all the different states, countries practiced that religion as it was taught, we wouldn't have the situation.
Exactly. We wouldn't need to see your doctor.
Right.
And
But that wasn't the case, you know.
And when we get to India, there's going to be just really expanding on what Colin said, is like the conditions of the time in India. This book does, this authorless book does a fantastic job of really describing the environment and the kind of zeitgeist of India at the time. This kind of transferring from the yoke of colonialism and trying and not really having this national identity, this national or even racial identity that goes back to, you know, what some of the most connected spiritually, you know, racially people, Blavatsky says there are. But moving back on to the judge, we'll just finish with a few quotes here and move on. Roberto?
Okay, and his good friend J.D. Buck said,
J.D. Buck?
J.D. Buck,
Yeah.
to get on with the work and forward the movement seemed to be his only aim in life. For myself, knowing Mr. Judge, as I did, an association with him day after day, at home, in the rush of work, in long days of travel over the desert wastes or over the trackless ocean. Having traveled with him a distance equal to twice around the globe, there is not the slightest doubt of his connection with and service of the Great Lodge. He did the Master's work to the best of his ability and thus carried out the injunction of HPB to keep the link unbroken.
Wonderful. I love that. Yeah, and how important it is. I mean, I'll close and then I'll ask some questions. I think this was a really good quote as well for someone who knew maybe both of them, William Judge and HPB. I don't know actually if Thomas Green knew HPB, but definitely Judge from this side. Well, William Judge was the nearest approach to my ideal of a man that I have known. He was what I want to be. Blavatsky was something more than human. She was a cosmic power. William Quan Judge was splendidly human, and he manifested in a way delightfully refreshing and all his own, the most rare of human characteristics, genuineness. His influence is continually present and powerful, and influence tending steadily as ever in one direction, work for the master's cause. I love it. And again, it's saying what we said before, kind of, it's like, you know, meeting Blavatsky was a big deal back when she was exotic, she was interesting, she would bring about conversation from her presence and appearance alone. But then, and it's kind of this Thomas Green's, he's struck, but she was more than human. She was a cosmic power. Imagine that, like, how intimidating that would be. Hey, just everything about Blavatsky seems intimidating to me. He's smoking, and but think that again, this genuineness and this gentleness of this man, that just felt so approachable. And he's, you know, he feels like one of those guys that, you know, when you talk to, really like sees in you and really like listens. Because there's, for his wisdom, and I mean for his relationship, I think that was the key to his relationship with HPV, was he listened the best. I think that he's a really good example of that. You read, I like some of Olcott's stuff, I like some of his, I like some of Bassan's stuff, but I don't think they heard as much as Judge did. And we'll close with just, this was from, I believe this is from Voice in the Silence, I think, maybe from March. This is Blavatsky, though. You will then have dropped and discarded forever the personality and persona of the previous lifetime, and will be embarking upon a new lifetime, incarnated in, through, and as a brand new persona, shaped and determined by your own past karma. And so the journey of ongoing inner evolution and unfoldment continues. As Krishna said in the Bhagavad Gita, the end of birth is death, the end of death is birth. And I think that one is quoted a lot in relation to Blavatsky, that Bhagavad Gita quote there. But I think that's awesome too, like, just like what Colin was saying, the inner evolution and unfoldment continues. You die, but that unfoldment of like true self, that continues. And yeah, that's it. Do you have anything else you want to share about Judge, or any questions, or anything you noticed?
Well, also adding to what Colin was saying, so we know that obviously the masters knew the condition of humanity, and they found the best vehicles, as I think Tanya said, right? The best vehicles available, and the idea that they could be mostly vehicles for this kind of wisdom, that they were conscious about it, because she would receive a lot of teachings from her masters. I guess she could hear them, she could see them, but yet she was aware of it. And she could remember everything, mostly everything, after she heard it or she saw it, you know, the astral plane or Akasha, wherever. But the idea that they were aware of it, it makes the difference. When we were talking about, you know, this idea of channeling or looking for other revelations, is that this seems to be that it was needed, because as we mentioned one time in the Voice of the Silence, she speaks of the 6 schools, and I mean, these are really great schools. All of this Vedanta, yoga, and whatever else, but they're supposed to be the best schools in the world, and yet something else was needed, and that was because, as it was mentioned, the idea that these systems were kind of keeping a lot of things from the mob, because they didn't think they deserved to know certain things.
Sure.
And therefore, not only that, but I guess the masters see when something is already needed, or when the mind is receptible for certain ideas. And then what happens is these two things. They give us the teachings, but as it was mentioned, they don't just give you everything and you read it and that's it. You're at that level. It's like you have to work on it. And the more you work on yourself, it seems like you render some veils. You see something that you didn't see before in the same paragraph. And that probably has to do with the voice of the silence of the keys that we are given, the paramitas, which is not only there, but in the secret doctrine, we get a lot of keys to understand these old writings, to know how to do a better interpretation on your own. I mean, and also what you learn from others and from her. But with these keys, these inner principles in ourselves, or the inner faculties, they seem to become developing.
Right.
And little by little, then there is this work that you begin to change your nature. You begin to understand more things, because it's not only intellectually, but then you begin to grasp things because you begin to feel them too, right? And see them. You see a different perspective because you read the secret doctrine or the voice of the silence, then you go back to something that you read before, and then you say, this is it. I see it in a different way. And maybe tomorrow you'll see it in a different way. It's never the same. But also the idea that it helps us not to get attached to any terminology, to any phrase, to any ideas, to detach from everything. They do help us, it's like a bridge. You cross a bridge, or you need a ladder to go up, and if you don't need it anymore, you get rid of the ladder. So the idea of sometimes this, what is called antascarana, but the idea is that these keys help us to cross the bridge, or to cross to the other side. The paramitas are said they help us to cross to the other side. I think the meaning of the paramita means that, is to go over, to cross over something. And this obviously is something it's metaphorical.
Sure. Yeah, I think that was one of again a good word for Judge too. He was a major facilitator. Like Blavatsky, he's not telling you what to believe or what's the best to believe, or he's giving you this path. He's laying out the groundwork and coming to you on an intellectual level that you can handle. And it's amazing. It was awesome. I wanted to say I snagged most of those great quotes from a website called Blavatsky Theosophy. I'm not sure if it's still up and going, but most of the info on that can be found on the current website, too, University of Theosophy and such. I think it was ran by someone in the ULT, because it's a very ULT site, but it was great. So whoever did that compiled the why was judge important to us page, things really was very helpful.
I think, Judge, for me, represents perseverance too, because he would sometimes hold meetings if no one, even attended, he would still hold a meeting or hold some talk. And, he went and opened many, many lodges around the United States, not just in New York. And, and I think his character, he walked the walk, his character spoke without him actually having to, say or expound on, Theosophy. Just his character, I think, was an example, and his perseverance was an example for Theosophy.
That's such a good point. And it's really an important point to I think for today, and to be impressed as current theosophists and believers in this and things is to put our money where our mouth is, to be a good example of this high-minded, intellectual stuff that we're doing, to be a good example of that. I mean, Blavatsky said a bunch of times in very different ways that if you're not consciously engaged in helping your fellow man, not by philosophizing it, by first person direct help, then you're not a theosophist. And that's something that we get criticized for. We get criticized inside and out, but people get frustrated by being like, well, why are we helping the homeless? Why are we doing this one? Well, that's great. And people, and I really encourage people with those ideas and those feelings to try to figure out a way to do that, because it's definitely in this city, it's not something you can just run outside and start doing. There's a lot of funding, there's a lot of organization that isn't established a lot of times you can do more harm than you could sometimes when you just run into things thinking you know the best way to help. So I think, but it is important, and it's something I struggle with, and I think a lot of us struggle with, is the difference between, you know, our spiritual, intellectual, higher modest kind of thing, our actions, what we're actually out there doing. And I think it's really important. I think Judges just screams as a great example of that. And we have great examples today in our own lodge and in our own spiritual communities outside the lodge of people like that. I think like Alan Wallace is an amazing example of someone who's really done a lot of studies and done some amazing things and has a brilliant resume. But first and foremost, he's a monk and he wants to do happy. And he's going to have that, you know, like, and I really love that. So yeah, thanks guys for helping the judge. He was someone that I didn't learn a lot about for a while until I actually started just reading his pamphlets and little bits and little bits, because, you know, I just wanted the meat, and I thought the meat was Blavatsky, and it is, but it's also a judge. They were colleagues, and they both had a really important part into getting this message out. But yeah, does anybody online have anything they want to share about William Judge?
Or question?
Comment? Okie doke, we will move on to Isis Unveiled. Okay, so who here has read through Isis Unveiled? Who's read the whole thing cover to cover? Yeah, me.
What parts of it? We're taking ISIS on Wednesdays.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, but we're ready on the fourth chapter.
Is it Spanish class?
Yeah, Spanish. Yeah.
One of my favorite classes when they started coming in years and years ago was ISIS, because it's so readable. And as like Western people, there's more familiarity when she's talking about things like Christianity.
Right.
And she's talking a little bit more about things more familiar to us.
Right, more historical, a lot of historical stuff that we can kind of relate to.
And I loved it. So I've read other Isis, not really in order, but I feel like as far as Theosophy, I've definitely read more of Isis than I have the Secret Doctrine. And I'll give credit where credit is due again to wonderful Victoria Prince, who really helped me in the early days when I was just like, what is the Secret Doctrine thing? Why are we reading this if we have Isis Unveiled? And like, she told me, and it was so good because it made me think, but it's one of those statements that makes you can think about it forever and come up with more. But just as a simple statement, it says enough. She said, Isis Unveiled is what isn't, Secret Doctrine is what is. And I was just like, wow, I mean, it's not as cut and dry as that, but overall, yeah. She's establishing in Isis Unveiled history and where a lot of these wisdom traditions went wrong or diverged. And then what it is, I mean, in my opinion, a lot tougher to grasp. True reality is a lot tougher to grasp in human history, I think. So, but I'll always think that Victoria had a way of really cutting through things. That was very pleased with her. Cutting through the noise and things and other voices, I think.
Well, also, it established her as knowledgeable in a lot of things that, you know, some people were very specific in a very small corner, but she goes through a whole wide section of what was known at the time and how it was known. You know, then she corrects those ideas later. But she had to present it as, she couldn't just come out with it without presenting where people already were.
Yeah.
And where things that people that were studying metaphysics of the time and religion of the time, they would be familiar with it, but the average person and the average intellect wouldn't be familiar with it. But then she also, you know, there's a whole section she talks about, you know, the Inquisitions and stuff like that. And you see like how religion was used to persecute a lot of people. A lot of those people were women, you know. Traditional medicine, stuff like that, they were, you know, tools of the devil. And so, you know, some people say, well, why does she go into so much because she's giving you like a small glimpse of the facts of how a long time, what was going on and what was supposedly civilization.
Right. And we'll get more into that when we get into like time in India. There's something different in like a lot of the way that Indians, especially throughout the ages, perceived eras, because there are a lot of people that are Hindu and living or even versing their religion are seeing time scale on thousands, tens of thousands of years, maybe millions of Kali Yuga and stuff. These ages in the Vedas are a lot longer than Christianity's been around. And in Christianity, in the short 2,000 years, but like 1,500, where it really kind of developed into what it is, that's really, really fast compared to like other religions and even Muslim traditions. But I think that's, again, without jumping totally back to Judge, I think that's why Judge is really important too, because he tempers some of the stuff that Blavatsky says. Like you can read, you can really get the impression that Blavatsky wants Christianity to be done away with. Like she can get really fiery and pretty vengeful speaking about Christianity. And a lot of that is, you know, she's so studious and so in touch with these corruptions, but also the synchronicities that Christianity had in the beginning as a wisdom religion, that it really, really hits her where other religions don't.
Well, also at the time, it was being used to conquer nations.
Still.
And so that's the thing, that when you read what she says, both in Isis and then in the Secret Doctrine, she points out on all the different religions where their strong points are, where their teaching is correct, and how she'll compare it and how it corresponds with the esoteric teaching. When she says that, you know, she's talking about what she is learning through, or has learned through the masters. But she also points out where they use that as a tool to control people, to manipulate people, or to take them in a different direction, the misinterpretation. And so at the time, yeah, she had to really kind of be hard on Christianity, because what Christianity was doing at the time.
So shaking somebody almost, yeah.
But the point is, I mean, you're talking 100 years ago, and what is going on now?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing. People don't learn from history if they don't pay attention and see that what happened 50 years ago, 10 years ago, 100 years ago can repeat itself. We could very easily go into the Dark Ages if we allowed that type of thinking that was happening in the Dark Ages from the religion to happen. And it slowly happens. It doesn't happen like, oh, next week you can't have any books. It happens by taking away certain books. Then it happens by taking away certain books out of certain places. Then they take more books out of more places. Then you have a committee that decides what books can't go into libraries, what books can't go into schools. That's going on now.
Yeah.
People look at the Dark Ages like, oh, how did that ever happen?
Oh, yeah.
Well, it happened because of how people think.
We're seeing a little bit more understanding.
And it didn't just happen in one place.
No.
You know, Hitler did it. The Khmer Rouge did it.
Yeah.
If you wore glasses in Cambodia, you were killed because you could be an intellectual and you might have read a book. You're dangerous for us. And that happens in various societies at different times because of thinking.
Yeah. No, one of my very favorite things Kurt Vonnegut ever said. I just love to be obsessed with Kurt Vonnegut, the way he'd say things. But he said, history without wise men to guide us is all it is stories of different empires and different great groups making the same mistakes of their forebears in more accelerated timelines. He's like, look at that. America has made the mistakes of the Roman Empire and the British Empire were 250 years old. It took Rome 2,000 years to do a lot of some of the mistakes he'd done. And you know, I think it's really important to see it that way, to see like on a historical scale, like without these wisdom traditions and without that, some kind of higher self leading communities and movements and peoples, it can just become kind of a repetition of the same ugliness until it's just forgotten enough to do again. You know, Jerry, you got something to say?
I wanted to say Well,
Well, one second.
go ahead, Barbara. That's fine.
Very quick. Usually the first book put out by a teacher is to work on, first of all, is to wake us up because we're so asleep and to make us aware of what personality can do. And then the second book that's written after personality has been the vices and the virtues, we have more virtues and we're able to, approach a real written text about what higher centers and what higher beings and things like that are about. But the first book comes out in order to destroy the old and to bring about the new. And that's kind of just what I wanted to comment on. But we have to have that understanding before we go into the new material, or it won't be digested properly, I think.
Well put, Barbara. Thank you. You always have a good way of saying things. Well put. Jerry.
Yeah, that's a good point, Barbara, and probably why one of her journals was called Lucifer. That was certainly intended to shake people up. I'm sorry, I'm struggling with a cold, so if I sound like I'm all stuffed up, it's because I am. I just wanted to mention on the judge front that the letters that have helped me have been, for so many of us, absolutely invaluable to the whole endeavor. And, there's just, all of us feel an immense sense of gratitude for that amongst so many other contributions to the Theosophical Movement. But anyone who hasn't had a chance to put some time into letters that have helped me will be benefited from it for sure. And then I just wanted to make the point too that, we kind of have gotten into a habit of complaining about, not us in this group today, but just in general over the 45 years I've been in the Theosophical circles. We kind of like to complain about how difficult HBB's writings are. And I think it's a little bit indicative of the fact that we don't actually have very good educations in modern times. She wrote to the intelligentsia of her era, the people who are well educated, and certainly probably the elite and the well-to-do and those who could afford to send their children to major universities, and that's just a fraction of the population. We have this sense that because we all go to major universities here in modern times that we're well educated. We're not. We don't know more than one language here in the United States typically, with the exception of Roberto. We don't know anything about the roots of religion or of language. I mean, if you were 100 years ago, even in this country, you'd learn Latin and Greek. But who learned Latin and Greek any longer? Who knows logic? Who knows grammar? I mean, it's no mystery why we struggle with an advanced intellect like HPB. We're ourselves struggling to catch up, essentially. Mm-hmm. So, in a way, when we engage in theosophical study, we're kind of starting our education over again. And I think Colin made this point, which is a really good one too. In some ways, that's not a bad thing. In fact, you might be better off to have close to no education before you encounter theosophy and begin it then, so that you don't have all of these misconceptions and assumptions to cast off and to get in the way and to darken a welcoming attitude and an open-minded attitude to these ideas. So, but I just felt compelled to mention that, we overestimate our current education, I think.
Yeah, this is a really good point too. That point of like, if you came at this from a less of a educated on metaphysical ideas and even like the history of Judeo-Christianity, you might be, you might be able to see it quicker. Without, I like the word you used, is it slough off these things. We have these conditions and all these fears and these accepted beliefs that we've never questioned. We just have them. And when we start studying Theosophy, we have this it can be painful, it can be long, this period of those things sloughing off, falling away like, like a person on fire, like these things slowly, and then sometimes pretty quickly when you really are able to have an aha moment. Mr. Judge may be re-explaining something for the 15th time.
And
Go ahead,
that reminds me of the introduction, probably mostly
please.
everybody's familiar with, on chapter 1, about education. Theosophy is that ocean of knowledge which spreads from shore to shore of the evolution of sentient beings. Unfathomable in its deepest parts, it gives the greatest minds their fullest scope. Yet, shallow enough at its shores, it will not overwhelm the understanding of a child. And that's the beauty. That's the beauty of this, philosophy, that anybody can more or less grasp it. I mean, you have more academic education, you are really, willing to learn this, then it might be weaker, maybe not, who knows, because it has to do with a lower mind, with personality.
Does it take a really good understanding of like the globes, right, and things like that to move ahead karmically? Does it?
Right. Yeah, I mean, you can understand all the schemes of the evolution, globes and rounds and everything.
Yeah.
But reading like the voice of the silence, then you have to do other changes in life, not only learning everything intellectually. So that's the idea. I think that's why that introduction is really well, because who would not feel welcome by reading that?
Oh, absolutely.
Even though as it was mentioned that
You should make some posters to that, yeah. That should be something to hang up. I think a good example for me, and it's just a short story in my life, is Shakespeare. I was raised by theater people and watched like Shakespeare movies and stuff as a kid. And so by the time we got to school, and back then he started studying Shakespeare in 6th grade, which sounds obscene now. Like I can't imagine 6th graders studying Shakespeare, but this was 1989 or something, 1990. And everybody was so bothered and just thought it was such impenetrable nonsense. And they still do. That went well into college and past college. It never really changed. And it always confused me. And I was like, why is this so hard to understand? But I took for granted I was kind of raised on it. And I had been given some of the meaning through the reaction of people I was watching it with. My understanding came over a long period of time. But then later in life, when I found people truly diving into Shakespeare themselves, like college, post-college, really getting in there because they wanted to, I was jealous. I was jealous of them getting to discover him for themselves without the influences of the parents or of people telling me what this means. And, I was jealous, just like I think, if you're raised by just kind of pastors your whole life telling you about Jesus, I think the first time you read his teachings, or even Buddha, especially Buddha, the first time you read Buddha's words is so much of a bigger impact than hearing about what he says or interpretations like that. Direct the way he said it and why he said it like that. And it's something that is so wonderful, the process of learning, than just kind of being, conditionally learned from your environment. They say that one of that we talk about a lot of times as Westerners, we're not as apt to be able to meditate, on these things that are more kind of taught and just accepted modes of life in Eastern societies and stuff like that. It can be really hard for us, but part of the value of that is we get to learn. We get to go through that struggle and learn why we have problem with this. There's an advantage to both perspectives, for sure. Go ahead.
So now that you've been studying Theosophy, have you come to a different understanding of Shakespeare? Yeah, from studying.
Oh, I mean, it's so now, because I study Shakespeare so much, when I read and see there's definitely things creeping in now where I'm oh. And there's a lot of talk and a lot of, I guess, old-fashioned conspiracy theories of mysticism that that Shakespeare might have had something to do with. There's a lot of stories of him being into Kabbalic numerology. Some of this stuff was written like that. So, I mean, he had a mystic bent, but definitely, I mean, if you know something about Theosophy and you read Macbeth, or even like Midsummer's Night's Dream, some of those comedies, and especially Caesar, I mean, you really kind of see some of those, you see it definitely on a different level. Instead of just individuals fighting for selfish means, they're almost forces of nature, or even entire sections of mankind that are struggling to develop. I mean, who else in that time was able to like spread themselves out to? And this is the thing, Madame Blavatsky, she traveled the world. She learned under his greatness. This poor guy Shakespeare, and he did make a lot of mistakes, and he had a lot of faults and stuff, but he didn't go anywhere. He just sat around, low-born guy, just educating himself as much as he could. He stopped going to school in 5th grade. Really, it's a self-education of a very low-born man, but I am one of the people that is of the school that I think it's one of the most valuable pieces of Western culture we have is Shakespeare. Anyway, it's enough about him. Let's get it. Cherry?
Yeah, I just wanted to back you up on that. I think your sentiment is shared by Theosophists all over the world. Shakespeare is held in the highest regard by most all Theosophists. And, you know, we are acutely interested in every element of human nature. That's central to the study of Theosophy. We want to understand every nook and cranny of the human constitution. And Shakespeare is a guide for that map, particularly for, you know, not just for all the foibles of man, but for his virtues as well. There was a woman that was a prominent member of the lodge in San Diego, Donna Woodruff, that was a lifelong actress in the Old Globe Theater, and she was a lifelong Theosophist like all of us, and she made the point that Shakespeare was her teacher, that she learned the most about the theosophical ideas that she was studying through Shakespeare. So you're certainly not alone.
Oh yeah.
Well, I think it's a good point to bring out, is to, in different eras, the ideas have to be presented in different ways, and not everybody will get it. People will go to the play and say, oh, that was an interesting play.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing now. It's like these ideas to affect humanity and to get people thinking have to be exposed to people.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they're coming at it and looking at it like a philosophical class.
Mm-hmm.
And you study philosophy to understand philosophy, and then you live your life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's different. If that's your attitude, that's all you're going to get out of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other aspect of education. You know, some of the people, what Berto was reading, someone that's highly educated will read Judge and think it's pretty basic and I get his point. Someone else will pick up the metaphysics of it and the practicality of how you apply certain ideas to your life, and it will have more meaning to them than someone that is coming from an intellectual point of view. And I think that's a big part of how we study, is what are you studying for? Are you studying to know more information, or are you studying to get a deeper understanding of your own nature and your states of consciousness that are possible?
Yeah.
Why can someone else go into a trance and I can't? And when they come out of a trance, they can present ideas that seem very profound or seem like they have a deeper experience without taking a hit of acid. So how does someone do that? How does someone open up a shop and be able to tell me stuff about my own nature on a psychic level? And no, they're not 100% correct, but they know enough that they're doing something. And how can they do that? It's no different than I can see someone ride a bike, that maybe I can ride a bike. I can see someone swimming, I'm going to try that. She's giving us ideas that are ancient, but also they apply to your own constitution and your own ability to where you develop. You don't need to get a degree. You don't have to go to a particular school. You have to be able to understand these ideas and try them out in your own nature
Yeah.
and see how it affects your life.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's great once we, just like you and just like Jerry said, it's wonderful in perspective. Once we start studying these things, we get to go back on some of our favorite works of art, favorite media, some of our favorite movies, and we get to see them on this different level. I think it's so valuable. James said in there, spot on, The Tempest was based, I think, was the wizard named Prothero, I think, was based on Dr. John B. Quinn Elizabeth's astronomer guy. So he was definitely aware of occultish things. I'm not sure about the sciences, but he was definitely aware. And I think in those day and ages, it was pretty hot, though it was still witch killing times. So you want to be careful. Barbara, you had something really great. I was wondering if you could close out meeting for us with that.
I'm sorry.
What were you about language?
Yes, what did you want me to speak about?
If you could expound on that, what you put in the chat.
Oh, about teaching?
Yeah.
Sure. I was a teacher for many years, and the way that we taught young children was very different in my day than it is today. And there was personal attention to each child, and figuring out what their needs are and so forth, and giving them understanding and a pathway to learn. But now what's happening is the kids get on, the internet, especially since this pandemic, and they're getting taught by these AI machine things. It's very different than having personal touch and someone that can really guide you.
Mm. And I think that's why I just being around some of the people here, I actually, I had never known anyone that had gone to like a Waldorf school. And I never knew about that until I look back on my childhood, and that sounds like fantasy. I'm just like, oh man, I'd be a philosopher king if I was brought up. But probably not. I would have been.
My daughter to Waldorf school, and how they teach math is actually through experience. You walk the steps. You walk 10 steps and you walk 5 steps back, and what's left? 5 more steps. I mean, it's really practical. They did farming. They learned a lot of things there that they would not learn in school. So I sent her there to get a little bit of practical, knowledge and to learn. I think it was a good education there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Barbara.
The other thing I wanted to mention is, if you don't know languages, what's a good thing is to use etymology online. Because you can go in there and put a word in, and they'll give you the history of the word as far back as you know, including going back to, as far as they can, Sanskrit. And then their information about putting all the languages together and then giving you one meaning as to what it is, even though that's the least I choose. But it can be very helpful when reading things, especially reading things from the 1900s, where they use different wording than we did. They use a different kind of English than we speak. And that's really helpful, I find, very often to go back to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, and when we combine like linguistics with anthropology, it opens up whole new avenues of history and understanding of like where things came from. It's wonderful.
Yes, and what things meant back then compared to what they mean now.
Huge difference. One thought before we close, just came to my mind, and now just since I have people, I often have a thought of like, what if, a big point in a baby's life, I guess maybe before 1, I'm sure, is learning object permanence, correct? They have that thing they show in psychological studies where you show a ball to a baby and then you take it away, and that baby thinks it's gone forever. What if we never learned that? What if we never learn object permanence, that things are forever, or that things stay? That maybe if you don't see it, it doesn't matter. It's not part of you. I don't know. I often think of that, and this stuff makes me think more.
I think we have to
power, or would you be, in a mental institution?
Well, I think we have to go through a process where we learn to identify through a way of like looking through mirrors, you know what I mean? A little bit like Alice in Wonderland. And then we begin to realize that, especially when we read the Isis Unveiled, or we begin to come out of sleep by waking up to what's really going on around us. And then we begin to cleanse ourselves and create something that can actually absorb reality as opposed to something that's looking in a mirror, But it seems that when we come to the earth, that's what we seem to learn, and then we have to shed that.
Yeah, exactly. It just brings up more wise with me, but that's why I'm here, so. Thank you everybody for coming. Has anybody got anything else to add? Tell us.
Yeah, I just
Thank you.
with my friends.
I really like that piece about Judge. I thank you for that. And, everything I'm learning here is great. But I didn't know that much about Judge, and that was a really great article. Thank you.
No problem.
I experiment this with my friends. They are connected with the IA, intelligent.
AI.
And also with Wikipedia and so on and so on. And they are so fast to answer questions, but without ethics. It's just information.
Yeah.
I don't say that this is not good, but if you don't put a little bit of ethics, it's not
Right.
just information.
Without learning something, and knowing something so much more valuable when you learn it. Not just it was like, oh, there's the answer.
I think
memorize.
I say academic donkeys. Yeah.
I'm in their same boat though. That's what I say. I'm that donkey judge riding off into the distance in between the dawn. All right, thank you so much,
Thanks,
everybody, for
everyone.
coming. We'll set up in the morning, and I think next week I believe Chris Alvarez is probably going to be shaking over. We maybe could let you know tomorrow in the evening.
Right. Good. Thank you.
I promise, Tanya, we'll get clear.
Gonna be the
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.